Grief does not live in your heart. It lives in your brain, and it is physically restructuring it right now. Most people who have lost someone they love describe it as a feeling, a weight in the chest, a fog behind the eyes, an ache that arrives without warning at 2 in the morning. But what neuroscience has discovered in the last 2 decades is something far more precise and far more profound than a feeling. Grief is a neurological event. It is your brain undergoing a structural renovation it never asked for, driven by molecular signals, rewired synaptic pathways, and a nervous system that is searching, moment by moment, for someone it can no longer find. This is not metaphor. This is mechanism. When researchers at UCLA and the Max Planck Institute scanned the brains of bereaved individuals using high-resolution fMRI imaging, they found something that should have made the front page of every newspaper on Earth. The regions lighting up most intensely during grief were not the emotional centers alone. They were the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine reward circuit, the same architecture that activates during addiction, during craving, during the desperate search for something the brain has learned to depend on. Grief at the molecular level is your brain in withdrawal from a person. Let that land for a moment. Your doctor has 7 minutes. A wellness article has 5 bullet points. What we are going to do here is go underneath all of that, down to the synaptic cleft, down to the receptor sites, down to the axons and dendrites that are being physically reshaped by the experience of losing someone. And we are going to understand what is actually happening inside you. Not to frighten you, to give you the extraordinary truth that your body is doing something ancient, complex, and in its own brutal way, deeply intelligent. The first mechanism to understand is what neuroscientists call predictive coding disruption. Your brain is not a passive receiver of reality. It is a prediction machine. Every single second of your waking life, your prefrontal cortex is running forward models of what comes next. Who answers the phone? Who sits at the table? Who breathes beside you in the dark? Over years and decades, the neural pathways encoding the presence of a person you love become structural. They are physically embedded in the architecture of your cortex as weighted synaptic connections, as myelinated axonal highways that fire automatically and constantly in anticipation of that person. Research published in the Journal of Neuroscience suggests that long-term relationships create what scientists describe as interpersonal neural coupling. Your brain's prediction networks literally synchronize with another person's behavioral patterns. When that person disappears, your brain keeps firing the predictions. It keeps expecting. It keeps searching. And every single time reality fails to confirm the prediction, every empty chair, every unanswered phone, every morning that arrives without their voice, your prefrontal cortex registers a prediction error, not symbolically, biologically, as a measurable mismatch signal that cascades downward through your nervous system. Grief in its earliest phase is your brain generating thousands of prediction errors every single day, and your body absorbing every one of them. The second mechanism is the cortisol cascade. Within days of a significant loss, studies indicate that cortisol, your primary stress hormone, manufactured by the adrenal glands and regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, rises to levels typically associated with chronic physical threat. Harvard Medical School research has documented that acute grief triggers a sustained cortisol elevation that can persist for months. And here is where the mechanism becomes dangerous. Cortisol in short bursts is adaptive. In prolonged elevation, it becomes neurotoxic. It begins to suppress neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, primarily in the hippocampus, the structure responsible for memory consolidation and spatial navigation. This is why grief impairs memory. This is why bereaved individuals frequently describe walking into rooms and forgetting why. This is why time feels distorted and concentration dissolves. Your hippocampus is operating under a sustained cortisol flood that is measurably reducing its capacity to form and retrieve information. The third mechanism brings us to the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the human body, running from your brainstem down through your throat, your heart, your lungs, your gut. In a healthy, connected nervous system, The vagus nerve maintains what researchers call high vagal tone, a state of flexible, responsive regulation that allows your heart rate to vary naturally, your digestion to function smoothly, and your social engagement system to remain open. Studies published in Psychosomatic Medicine indicate that grief dramatically reduces vagal tone. The nerve loses its regulatory flexibility, and when vagal tone drops, a cascade follows. Heart rate variability decreases, inflammatory cytokines rise, immune surveillance weakens, gut motility slows. This is the biology behind the physical symptoms of grief that medicine has historically dismissed as psychological. The tight chest, the nausea, the exhaustion that sleep does not fix. These are not imagined, they are vagal. They are measurable, they are real. The fourth mechanism operates at the level of the default mode network, the constellation of brain regions most active when you are not focused on the outside world, when you are remembering, when you are imagining, when you are constructing your sense of who you are. Research from University College London and published in Nature Neuroscience indicates that in long-term relationships, the default mode network encodes the other person as part of the self model. Your neural representation of yourself and your neural representation of the person you love share cortical territory. They are not stored separately. They are woven. This is why grief does not feel like losing someone external to you. It feels like losing part of yourself. Because at the level of neural architecture, you are. The fifth mechanism is neuroinflammation. Studies published in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity indicate that psychological loss triggers the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemical messengers including interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, that were originally evolved to respond to physical wounds and infection. Your immune system cannot distinguish between a gash in your skin and the rupture of a deep relational bond. It responds to both with inflammation. In the short term, this is protective. In sustained grief, it becomes systemic. Chronic neuroinflammation has been linked by researchers at the National Institutes of Health to increased risk of depression, cognitive decline, and cardiovascular disease. When the NHS and the CDC both document elevated mortality rates in bereaved spouses in the year following loss, what researchers call the widowhood effect, neuroinflammation is one of the primary biological pathways driving that statistic. Now here is what almost no one knows about what happens next inside the grieving brain. And this changes everything you thought you understood about why grief takes so long. Buried within the devastation of acute grief is a process neuroscientists are only beginning to map with precision. The brain, confronted with the permanent removal of a deeply encoded relational template, does not simply mourn. It reorganizes. Synaptic pruning accelerates in the regions holding the strongest predictive models of the lost person. The default mode network undergoes what University of California researchers describe as a reorganization of self-concept. New dendritic growth begins, slowly, imperfectly, in regions adjacent to the loss. The brain is not broken, it is rebuilding. And that rebuilding is metabolically expensive, neurologically disorienting, and completely invisible to everyone around you who thinks you should be feeling better by now. Think of it this way. Imagine your brain as an ancient city, and every relationship you have ever built is a road. Some roads are narrow tracks used occasionally, but a road built over decades of shared experience, shared meals, shared fears, shared silences, becomes a motorway. 6 lanes wide, lit, paved, traveled thousands of times. When that person is gone, the motorway does not vanish overnight. It remains, expecting traffic that no longer comes. For months, sometimes years, your brain sends signals down that motorway and meets only silence. The reorganization of grief is the slow, cellular, synaptic work of rerouting, of building new neural infrastructure around an absence that will always be there. After the age of 55, this process changes in ways science is only beginning to quantify. Research suggests that neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new synaptic connections, decreases measurably with age. The myelin sheaths insulating axonal pathways become less efficient. The hippocampus, already under cortisol pressure, has reduced neurogenic capacity compared to a younger brain. This does not mean the older brain cannot grieve and reorganize. It does. But the Journal of the American Geriatric Society has documented that bereavement in adults over 60 is associated with significantly elevated risk of cardiovascular events, immune dysregulation, and accelerated cognitive decline in the 12 to 18 months following loss. This is not weakness. This is biology. This is the measurable cost of having loved long enough and deeply enough that your nervous system built its entire predictive architecture around another living person. And here is the one thing, the single most evidence-supported awareness the science points toward. Not a supplement, not a technique, human presence. Physical proximity to another nervous system. Because vagal tone, research now confirms, is co-regulated. Your vagus nerve responds to the proximity of safe others in ways it cannot replicate in isolation. A hand held, a voice in the room, a body sitting near yours in silence. These are not comforts. They are neurological inputs that directly modulate your autonomic nervous system, reduce circulating cortisol, suppress inflammatory cytokine production, and begin, slowly, imperfectly, but measurably, to rebuild the regulatory capacity that grief has stripped away. The most advanced neuroscience in the world has arrived at the same answer your grandmother already knew. Do not grieve alone. Please note that while this video draws on peer-reviewed neuroscience research, it is educational in nature and is not a substitute for professional medical or psychological support. If you are experiencing complicated grief, please speak with your doctor or a qualified mental health professional. Here is the thought I want to leave with you. You are made of atoms. The calcium in your bones was forged in the core of a star that died before our sun existed. The carbon in every one of your neurons was assembled across 4 billion years of biological iteration. And the love you feel, the grief you carry right now, is not a departure from that physical reality. It is its highest expression. The universe spent 4 billion years building nervous systems complex enough to encode another person so completely that losing them constitutes a measurable neurological event. Your grief is not weakness. It is not malfunction. It is evidence of the most extraordinary thing matter has ever learned to do, which is to reach across the silence between two bodies and attach itself synaptically, molecularly, and permanently to another human being. If this has helped you understand what your brain is actually doing, or helped you understand what someone you love is going through right now, please send this to them. Not just a link, a message with it, a voice note, a reason to feel less alone in what is one of the most profound biological experiences a human nervous system can undergo. Share this with someone who is grieving and needs to know that what they are feeling is not weakness. It is the science of having loved. And if you want to understand what loneliness does to those same neurons, what happens at the cellular level when human connection is absent, not through loss, but through isolation, that is exactly where we are going next.